Hello, I'm Dr. Atta Addo, a lecturer in digital innovation at the University of Surrey's Business School. In this brief presentation, I'll be sharing some preliminary insights from our work looking at the link between blockchain and interorganizational trust in the context of the trade logistics information pipeline being developed within the ecosystem of trust program. The background of this study is that modern supply chains have an abundance of data. However, much of this data still remains paper-based, and partly as a result, various logistics management solutions are plagued with data inaccuracies and inconsistencies that lower the trustworthiness of shared data. And this is particularly true of cross-border trade. Trust is often understood as a social or psychological phenomenon, and therefore the link to technology cannot be taken for granted, but requires further unpacking to explain specifically how particular design affordances of these technologies are implicated in the production of trust. In this research, we view trust production with blockchain through a socio-technical lens. The socio-technical perspective is a theoretical approach that is well developed in the field of information systems as a way of highlighting the complex entanglement between material technology artifacts, technical and social aspects of organizational change. And this view can be contrasted with other perspectives that might consider technical or social systems separately without problematizing the link between them. So for example, there are many papers that look at specific technical capabilities of blockchain and what they might mean for international trade, without necessarily looking at them in the context of specific organizational settings or specific use cases. And similarly, there are research findings that would focus on organizational aspects of technology adoption, but consider the technology as a black box and simply look at the way organizations and users adapt to such technology. So in this research, we take the entanglement between the technical and the social more seriously. To answer the question of how blockchain might enable the production of trust, specifically in the context of the TLIP platform, we conducted an interpretive qualitative study of the design and development phase of the TLIP. And we drew on data from April through November of 2022, where we conducted interviews with various project stakeholders, project architects, and also drew on documents and meeting notes on the ecosystem of trust. Specifically, we focused on how trust, which is a social phenomena, is inscribed in the material artifacts of the TLIP to create specific affordances that can enable trust and the implications of such affordances in the organizational setting of UK-Kenya trade. And specifically, we drew on literature that emphasizes process-based, institution-based, and characteristic-based interorganizational trust, and tried to map the data that we gathered on the design and development of TLIP to this literature on these three different types of trust. And the broader goal was to understand whether the TLIP design and development met the theoretical conditions to deliver expectations on trust production. In terms of the three forms of trust, they currently exist within international supply chains. So the question really is the degree to which blockchain might enhance the production of these different forms of trust. So process-based trust, which is commonly associated with interactions and transactions, draws a lot on the historical perspective. So in the process-based world of trust, reputation matters a great deal, as well as records of prior transactions. And both of these are very important in international supply chains. So for example, reputation of different stakeholders, such as clearing agents, are vital for assessing trustworthiness and risk. And similarly, large data sets that enable records of specific transactions in very granular level also contributes to the production of process-based trust. In the context of international trade, the most important source of trust still remains institution-based. And this relates to formal and informal structures, such as the role of intermediaries like insurers, banks, and recognized agents, certifications, credentialing, seals of authorizing bodies, as well as standards such as ISO standards and regulatory standards. And then, of course, the legal requirements through declarations, bills of lading, and contracts. But blockchain, by its very premise, seeks to sideline these traditional institutional sources of trust. And it is no surprise that in this particular research, we found very little evidence of blockchain enhancing existing institutional based trust. In terms of characteristic-based trust, certain types of goods, importers, origins, destinations, or combinations of all of these are captured through documentation, which helps to improve trustworthiness. And this is one area where we also found blockchain to be significant. To understand how a digital artifact such as blockchain might deliver an outcome such as interorganizational trust, it is important to distinguish between the context of design and implementation and the context of use. So in the field of information systems, the context of design has often been associated with planned action, which is known to be very different from the context of use where situated action happens. The context of design and implementation is often high level and involves various stakeholders inscribing an artifact with their understanding of social structures such as trust into the digital code. And these inscriptions create particular affordances and constraints in the technology. Affordances can be understood simply as possibilities for action. So for example, a chair might afford sitting, but for a person to sit, they must perceive the affordance of the chair and act upon it appropriately. For example, by sitting and not standing on the chair. Therefore, the design and implementation context is only one piece of successful organizational change with technology like the blockchain TLIP. The other equally important aspect is that stakeholders, and especially system users, should be able to descript or enact the inscriptions in the technology and appropriately perceive the affordances for action. So in a nutshell, an important condition for successful information systems change with a technology such as TLIP is that the context of design and the context of use must strongly overlap. Through these theoretical lenses, three main findings come to light from our research. The first is that blockchain affordances such as data immutability, decentralized data management, verifiability, data lineage, auditability of data, and data ownership affords process-based and characteristics-based trust. Institution-based trust, which remains the bedrock of international supply chains, remains largely unaffected, but still vital. The second important finding is that despite blockchain's potential, it cannot address all the pain points that were identified in focus groups. We aggregated these pain points into social, technical, and socio-technical types of issues and found that with social issues such as unwillingness of some stakeholders to share accurate data, likelihood to tamper goods or to steal, corruption, lack of clear knowledge, and SMEs struggle to attain trusted trader status to speed up the movement of goods, blockchain had very little potential to render change. And this makes sense when you consider that many of these are fundamentally organizational in nature or require some other kinds of interventions for successful transformation. Blockchain was most effective with rendering technical change. So for example, changes to the speed of verifying data, changes to redundant or missing information, or improvements to data such that they could no longer be manipulated, as well as real-time tracking. These were purely technical in nature, and blockchain affordances had a high potential to drive change. Other kinds of pain points, such as the paper-based nature of cross-border supply chains, visibility and traceability, implicate various other levers such as policy, organizational norms, and so on for effective transformation. And so for these, blockchain might have some potential, but the eventual outcome remains unclear and contingent. The third important finding is that there appears to be a divergence in the perceived benefits of blockchain. So despite the expectation of blockchain in TLIP acting almost as a kind of silver bullet for issues of mistrust in the trade supply chain and various other stakeholder pain points, and also the expectation for blockchain to radically transform the supply chain, the reality appeared to be far more modest when we interviewed various stakeholders. The key perceived benefit of the TLIP appears to be the advanced pre-arrival notification capability. And this view was shared by importers that we spoke to, as well as certain leaders of the port community system operator. Secondly, there was no clear hypothesized link between blockchain and trust. So some of the stakeholders that we spoke to suggested that the whole framing of trust was really coming from the government side, and that most stakeholders perceived other kinds of benefit. And finally, the exact benefits of the TLIP still appears in exploration. So for example, total time of logistics costs estimates by the Global Trade Facilitation Alliance in the context of the flower trade between the UK and Kenya suggests a very limited scope for time and cost savings. And this might vary with other types of products, but it's an indication that the straightforward expectations of blockchain might not necessarily be accurate. In summary, blockchain inscriptions and affordances have the potential to enable process-based and characteristics-based forms of trust in the international trade supply chain. However, institutional trust, which still remains fundamental to international trade, is much less affected by blockchain. Inscriptions and affordances are also not sufficient, although necessary, for successful change. Whether system users perceive and make appropriate use of designed affordances will be crucial to the success of the platform. Furthermore, there are different expectations of the potential benefits of the TLIP, and there's no uniform understanding of the link between blockchain and trust beyond the assumed affordances of blockchain. And this might be an important thing to pay attention to if the whole goal of promoting trust is not to fall by the wayside and is to deliver any tangible benefits. In light of our findings, a few outstanding questions might be worth reflecting upon. The first one is, whether a common understanding of the link between blockchain and trust can be generated and socialized among stakeholders. Secondly, the exact incremental benefit of blockchain to existing UK port community systems, especially given the fairly high levels of performance of systems like the Destinate and the CNS. And also thinking beyond efficiency and effectiveness metrics, which appears to be what the pilots have solely focused on, what other potential benefits could blockchain deliver on? And finally, process-based and characteristics-based trust, the extent to which those might be radical in terms of transforming the international trade supply chains, as opposed to, for example, the established institutional-based trust. That's all for this presentation. Thank you.